Okay, so imagine, right? Imagine being accused of something so awful, so scary, that it was actually considered even worse than murder.
Wow.
Yeah, that was the reality for people accused of practicing witchcraft in ancient Rome.
Really?
Yeah, it's pretty wild. So today, we're diving deep into the world of witches.
Ooh.
In Greco-Roman literature, we're going to explore how they were portrayed, how it changed over time from like these enchanting figures in myths to these like really fearsome necromancers who could like shake up society. And
Interesting.
the sources we've got, they're amazing. We've got ancient epics, plays, Roman poetry, satire. We've even got a wild story about a man who was turned into a donkey.
Oh, I love that story.
That's pretty crazy.
It's fascinating how these stories, even though they're like, myths and fantasy, they actually give us a window into like the real anxieties and beliefs of the ancient world.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So let's start with like the OG witches, right?
Okay.
The most famous ones in Greek mythology.
Yes.
Cersei and Medea. These powerful sorceresses, they weren't just like making love potions. They were messing with magic
Yeah.
that could like change reality.
Oh, absolutely. Like think about Cersei. She could turn men into pigs.
What?
Yeah, just
That-
a sip of her potent like concoctions.
That is crazy.
Isn't that wild? And it's interesting, like the word pharmacy actually comes from the Greek word for drug,
Oh, really?
pharmakon.
Oh, wow. So it makes you think about like how healing and magic they were like kind of intertwined back then, right?
Totally. It wasn't just about curing ailments. It was about like controlling the power of nature itself.
Right.
Exactly. And then you've got Medea,
Yeah, Medea.
who takes it even further. She can control the elements, summon the goddess Hecate from the underworld. She can even inflict harm with the evil eye.
Okay, now the evil eye, that was like a real fear back then. Imagine thinking that someone could just like look at you and curse you.
It's true. It really
It's a whole new meaning to if looks could kill.
Right. The belief in the evil eye was so widespread, people actually wore amulets for protection.
Wow.
I know. It's a concept that, even today still exists in some cultures.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I love how these ancient beliefs like kind of echo through time,
Yeah.
It's so interesting to see how it connects. But what I find really interesting is how Cersei and Medea, they had all this power, but they were still portrayed as really captivating,
Right.
even seductive figures. They really set the stage for like those classic witchy tropes, like the potions and the spells, the wands, and of course, like that connection to erotic magic.
Right. They embodied this kind of power that was like both alluring and dangerous.
Yes.
And that's what makes them so compelling even after all these years.
Yeah, definitely. So speaking of powerful witches, we can't forget about Thessaly,
Oh, yes, Thessaly.
this region in ancient Greece that basically became like synonymous with witchcraft.
The land of witches.
Why do you think that is?
Well, I think part of it was Thessaly's location. Being in northern Greece, it was seen as, a little bit of a wild frontier,
Okay.
like less civilized,
Oh, interesting.
more connected to like those mysterious eastern lands, where all these strange and exotic practices flourished.
So it's like the Wild West of ancient Greece.
Exact.
Yeah, very cool.
And so it became associated with all these practices that the Greeks considered like weird and other, including this potent form of magic called the Thessalian trick.
Oh, the Thessalian trick. Okay, tell me more about that. What kind of magic are we talking about?
So it was believed that Thessalian witches could create cosmic disorder. Like they could pull down the moon,
No way.
they could darken the skies, even blur the lines between life and death.
That's terrifying.
Can you imagine the fear? Like people really believed that the fabric of reality could be manipulated by these women.
That is wild.
I know. It's amazing how these stories, they really show how fascinated people have always been with the unknown.
Yeah.
Like the things we can't control.
And I find it really interesting that these Thessalian witches, they were often portrayed as just like ordinary older women,
It's true.
not like glamorous goddesses.
Right, like Cersei and Medea.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like a shift in the portrayal. Right.
Definitely. Yeah, it is. These were older women. They were often like marginalized in society. And they represented this potential threat to the established order.
Mhm.
It was a reminder that power could be found in unexpected places.
I like that.
And their magic, it wasn't about beauty or seduction.
Right.
It was about raw, untamed force.
Yeah.
The kind that could like disrupt reality.
Wow. So it's like the image of the witch is like becoming darker, like
Totally.
more unsettling.
Yeah, and that brings us to the Romans.
Okay.
where the portrayal of witches, it gets even more grotesque and terrifying,
Oh, no.
reflecting this really deep-seated suspicion of magic, especially when it was used by women who, like, defied societal expectations.
Interesting. Okay, so let's talk more about that.
Yeah, let's get into it.
So we were talking about how in Roman literature, the image of the witch gets, like, darker and more sinister.
Yeah, and I think the Roman poet Horace, he gives us a really good example of that shift with Canidia.
Canidia, okay.
Yeah, she's not like a glamorous sorceress
Right.
like Cersei or Medea,
Yeah.
She's older, and Horace describes her as ugly,
Oh, wow.
promiscuous, and totally like defiant of Roman social norms.
She sounds terrifying.
Right.
Yeah.
Like she wouldn't be out of place in a horror movie.
Exactly.
Horace really goes all out in making her like grotesque and repulsive, and it's not by accident. She embodies everything that the Romans feared about powerful women, especially, those who aged without conforming to what society expected.
Yeah, yeah.
And who like dared to embrace their sexuality.
It's like he's using Canidia to, like, critique those societal anxieties of his time, right?
Exactly. He's holding up a mirror to Rome
Yeah.
and saying, look at what you're afraid of.
Wow, I like that.
And then he takes it even further by showing her doing these necromantic rituals with her, like, sidekick Sagana.
Sagana, okay.
Yeah. So picture this, okay? A new garden
Okay.
that's built over an old graveyard.
Already kind of creepy.
Right. That's the perfect setting for them to, like, dig up bodies,
Oh, my God.
sacrifice black lambs, use voodoo dolls, like all those classic elements of necromancy.
Those rituals are described so vividly.
I know, it's like so real.
It makes you wonder how much of it was actually happening in ancient Rome.
It's hard to say,
Yeah.
but it definitely tapped into very real fears about magic, especially that darker side of magic that deals with death and spirits.
Right, and even though Horace makes fun of Canidia, you still get the sense that he sees her as a real threat.
Oh, totally. She represents chaos and the potential for harm, which is what Romans associated with witchcraft, especially when it was practiced by people who, like, dared to operate outside of the boundaries of acceptable behavior.
I see, yeah. But Horace also, like, injects some humor into it.
Oh.
Like, remember that scene where they get scared away by a farting statue?
Oh, yes. Priapus, the fertility god.
Yes.
It's brilliant.
It's hilarious.
It's like this burst of absurd comedy
Right.
in the middle of this, like, horrific ritual. It reminds us that even when we're dealing with our deepest fears, there's always room for laughter.
Yeah, it's like he's saying that witchcraft is dangerous and scary, but it can also be kind of ridiculous.
Exactly. He's playing with these conflicting emotions, fear and mockery, to make this really complex and human portrayal of Canidia.
Really well done.
Yeah.
So we've talked about Cersei, Medea, Thessaly, Canidia, all really fascinating examples of how witches were depicted.
Right.
But I feel like we're about to go even darker.
You're right. Get ready to meet Erichtho, the ultimate necromancer from Lucan's epic poem about the Roman Civil War.
Erichtho, oh man, that name just sends chills down my spine. I've heard she makes Canidia look like a harmless old granny.
Oh, yeah. Erica, she lives in tombs, collects body parts from battlefields, and her appearance is like straight out of a nightmare. Pale, unkempt, like a walking corpse.
It's crazy how these ancient writers could create such vivid and terrifying images just with their words.
Yeah.
It's like they paint a picture in your mind.
And Lucan, he doesn't hold back on the gory details.
Oh, wow.
He describes Erichtho's rituals like in graphic detail, emphasizing the violence, the desecration of corpses, and the sheer power of her magic.
So what kind of magic does she even use? What makes her scarier than all the other witches we've talked about?
Well, Erichtho is like a master of the dark arts. She can control the elements, disrupt the cosmic order. Even the gods are said to fear her.
Wow.
But her specialty, her real power, is necromancy, being able to raise the dead and make them do her bidding.
It's a concept that has fascinated and terrified people forever. Imagine believing that death itself could be defied.
Right.
That the spirits of the dead could be, like, summoned and controlled.
And Lucan gives us this really disturbing scene where Erichtho reanimates a dead soldier
Oh, no.
to predict the outcome of the Roman Civil War.
That scene, oh man, it's one of the most chilling things I've ever read. It takes place on a battlefield, right?
Yeah, Pharsalus. It's covered in corpses.
Yeah.
And Pompey's son, Sextus, he goes to Erichtho to find out his fate.
Right.
And she does this elaborate ritual with the pit, fire, libations, chanting, all meant to call forth the spirits.
It's like a mix of like ancient ritual and supernatural power.
Exactly. It's meant to be both awe-inspiring and terrifying.
It's interesting how the rituals and sacrifice are like a recurring theme in these stories about witches.
Hmm.
It makes me wonder if it's tapping into some like primal human instinct,
Hmm.
like a desire to connect with the unseen world, to control life and death.
I think you're right.
Yeah,
These rituals, no matter how gruesome, they show how humans need to understand the mysteries of existence,
Yeah.
to find meaning and purpose when things feel chaotic.
that makes sense. So she actually raises a corpse from the battlefield. What happens next?
She does, and it's not just any corpse. She picks the body of a soldier who died a really horrible death.
Oh, no.
His eyes were gouged out, his tongue cut out,
Oh, my God.
all to make sure that his spirit is filled with rage and despair, making him the perfect vessel for her prophecy of doom.
That is messed up.
Right.
It's like Lucan is really pushing the boundaries of horror, showing us the dark side of humanity.
Right, it's not just about being shocking. It's about using horror to see something about the moral decay that comes with war and ambition.
So Eryx, though, isn't just a scary witch. She's a symbol of the horrors of war.
Exactly. And the breakdown of society. She embodies the Romans' worst fears.
Yeah.
Chaos, the unknown, losing control.
That's a powerful image.
Yeah.
So Eryx, though, really gives us a lot to think about. But before we, get lost in all the darkness, let's move on to something a little lighter but still fascinating. The story of Lucius, the guy who accidentally gets turned into a donkey.
Oh, yes. The Golden Ass by Apuleius.
Yeah, exactly. It's like a wild ride through Roman magic and witchcraft from the point of view of a man who's been turned into an animal.
It's like a dark comedy
Yeah.
set in the ancient world, full of crazy characters, weird situations, and of course, lots of witches.
So what are some of the things that happened to Lucius on his journey through this magical underworld?
Yeah, Lucius becoming a donkey, it's like he's thrown into this world of magic.
Totally. He's like this accidental tourist, just stumbling into all these secret rituals and dangers.
Yeah, it's wild.
And one of the wildest stories he comes across is about this guy named Socrates.
Okay.
Not the philosopher, by the way.
Right, right.
And his pretty bad encounter with a witch named Moreau.
This is the one where she rips his heart out.
Yeah, talk about a bad breakup.
Seriously.
So Moreau, she uses her magic to basically enslave Socrates.
Mm-hmm.
And when he tries to escape, well, she gets her revenge.
Oh, no.
She stabs him, rips out his heart, and she replaces it with a sponge. Yeah, it's kind of funny in a really dark way. Yeah, I guess so.
It's like that dark humor that you find in these stories. And it gets even weirder. Socrates seems to come back to life the next day, just going about his business.
Wait, how is that even possible?
Well, it's all part of Mero's plan. The sponge, it's only temporary.
Oh.
And when Socrates bends down to take a drink from a brook, the sponge falls out, and he dies for real this time.
It's a crazy scene. Horrifying, but also kind of funny. It's like Apuleius is really playing with the unpredictable nature of magic. But what do you think he's trying to say with this story?
I think it reflects how real the fear of witchcraft was in Roman society. Remember, you could be executed for practicing magic. Even Apuleius himself was accused of sorcery.
Oh,
So these stories, they weren't just fantasy, they showed the real danger of getting mixed up with magic.
it makes you wonder how much of his own life experiences are in Lucius's story. Like he's showing us the dark side of Roman society, where magic and superstition were everywhere.
Totally. And that leads us to one last tale of necromancy. This one's from Heliodorus' novel, An Ethiopica. It takes place on a battlefield, bodies everywhere, and there's this old woman mourning her dead son. Imagine her grief, her desperation, pushing her to seek out forbidden magic.
It's interesting how a lot of these stories happen in these in-between places, like battlefields, graveyards, where the line between worlds feels really thin.
Right. It's in these spaces that the impossible feels possible, where life and death kind of blur together. So this mother, she wants to be with her son again, so she performs this ritual with all the familiar elements, the pit, fire, libations, sacrificing a black animal. It's all very similar to the other necromantic rituals we've talked about.
It's like there's a recipe for talking to the dead.
Right. But here's the twist.
Okay.
When the son's ghost appears, he doesn't thank his mother for bringing him back. He actually gets mad at her for disturbing his peace and using forbidden magic.
Wow, that's not what I was expecting.
Right. It's like the ghost is saying, leave the dead alone. There are some lines you just don't cross.
Yeah, even with magic.
Exactly. It shows that even in the world of magic, there are rules and consequences. Messing with the dead, even with good intentions, can be really dangerous. And this story also brings up the idea of the evil eye,
The evil eye, right?
that seeing forbidden rituals can bring harm to the person watching.
It's like the magic itself is dangerous?
Yeah, it reinforces the fear and mystery that have always surrounded these practices.
So we've gone from these seductive sorceresses to these terrifying necromancers. It's been a fascinating look at how witches were portrayed in Greco-Roman literature. It's clear that they really captured people's imaginations. What stands out to you the most from all these stories?
I think the most interesting thing is how these stories show us what people were really anxious about, whether it was the power of women, the unknown, or messing with the natural order. These stories were a way for people to deal with their deepest fears.
And those fears, they haven't really gone away, have they?
Not really.
We might not be afraid of witches the same way the Romans were, but we're still drawn to stories about magic, the supernatural, and people who try to push the boundaries of what's possible.
Totally. It shows how fascinated we are with the unknown and how much we want to believe that we can shape reality. These ancient myths, they give us a glimpse into the human mind. They remind us that even when faced with the impossible, we still search for meaning, purpose, and maybe even a little bit of magic in our lives.
Well said. And with that, I want to thank you all for joining us on this deep dive into the world of Greco-Roman witchcraft. We've learned so much about the power of storytelling, how myths change over time, and how fascinated we are with the supernatural. Keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep diving deep.